about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today, we're pleased and honored once again to have our weekly podcast with Economist Andy Sutton, formerly of the financial community, however, now is involved for the purpose of blowing the whistle on corruption in our government and helping people around the globe become their own advocates. Let's see if I can get him on the line here. Split screen. Andy, welcome back to Liberty Talk Radio. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today.
Hi, Joe. How's it going this week?
Okay, fine. Andy, do you mind if I start with a little bit of a rant?
No, go right ahead.
Okay.
I'm looking up some information here.
Well, you know, what's the latest thing is this. Well, not only is the Fed's funds rate not being increased, but this problem that we have, supposed problem we're having with Venezuela, where we're putting sanctions on them, and of course that means that I cannot trade with Venezuela anymore because our government puts the squabosh on that. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think there's anything in the Constitution that says that the government can prohibit me from buying or selling goods to a foreign nation. I mean, now, of course, if we're at war, I mean, if someone's attacking us, we don't want to supply them with ammunition, obviously. But just because we disagree with the manner in which their elected officials are handling things there, we put a sanction on them, which means I can't trade. But what happens if, in fact, Venezuela has a product, the best made product that I can buy at the best price that helps my business become profitable? Well, I can't do that. The government is prohibiting me from buying from them. Now, isn't that unconstitutional in and of itself? I mean, where is it in the Constitution that says the government has the right to tell me, or has the authority to tell me who I can and cannot trade with? I don't think that's anywhere.
Well, they don't.
We concoct this stuff up, you know, and all of a sudden they're our mortal enemy. Well, quite frankly, they're not attacking us. What Venezuela does stays in Venezuela. It has nothing to do with us at all, and we should be out of it altogether. We should keep our mouth shut and mind our own damn business. Thank you very much, Andy, for being on our show, and thank you for letting me rant on. It just hacks me off that we have to be involved in every stupid country, have over 900 military bases around the world, just constantly manipulating every country to think the way we want them to think, and it's costing us trillions of dollars a year, and yet no one says a damn word about it. I don't understand it. I don't think we're going down the right path.
No, we're not. Honestly, we don't care what they think, really. All we care is that they give us what we want, which in the case of Venezuela is oil. And if you look back, I guess it was maybe 2 months ago, there was an article that came out that they were shifting away from the dollar. You know, we've talked about that a bunch of times. And suddenly, mysteriously, miraculously, we have a stooge who is, I'm not even going to go there, who suddenly, you know, we're recognizing as the new leader of Venezuela, and it's very obvious just listening to the various individuals. Notice they're all military individuals, except for that idiot in the Treasury, Mr. Munchkin, I call him. He seems to think that it's our entitlement to interfere in their business. And actually, what you mentioned, what the government's doing, it's doing what's called tortious interference. It's basically interfering in your ability to do business if you buy products from these individuals, whether it's within the country or whether it's outside the country. They're basically interfering in your right to do business and your right to engage in contracts and things of that nature.
Right.
Nobody cares about that anymore. You don't hear it. It's not talked about. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, Maduro is going to be, cutting the heads off small children and attacking them with chlorine gas, much like we heard over in Syria with Assad, who we also wanted him deposed and his government deposed for various. And look, I'm not saying any of these guys are saints. They're not. None of these guys are saints. However, when you lie, which is what's going on, when you lie to go into a country and try to impose your will on them, that's another matter entirely. So this whole idea, and this is what I find to be absolutely hilarious. People in this country get incensed when you mention the word Russia, and they will insist that Russia in some way or another, to whose side it doesn't really matter, to the benefit of some, to the detriment of others, meddled in the U.S. democratic process when we had a couple of years. They don't think about that we go into another country, Venezuela, and meddle openly in their democratic electoral process. It's the hypocrisy and double standard is amazing. The economic consequences of all of this will be felt down the road, unfortunately, and that's one of the biggest problems is with economics. There's laws like anything else, but what people haven't figured out is you can delay consequences, and you can delay consequences for a lot of things. You can take pills that'll cover up 13 Big Macs a day and not have the coronary for an extra couple of years, but you're still going to eventually, more than likely, have the coronary. We seem to think that because the Fed can play games, and we really need to talk about what they're doing. We seem to think that because they can play games and manipulate numbers and statistics and whatnot, that we're just somehow immune from the consequences of our actions, and nothing's further from the truth. And that's what you're not hearing talked about. Before we get too far, the last time we were on, we talked about corporate debt, and there were a couple of things that came up, I should say, and we did some research here and got answers for people to those questions. Had talked about the rate of money that we were borrowing in terms of growth. U.S. government for the current fiscal year, which started on October 1st of last year, 2018, is currently borrowing $7.36 using generally accepted accounting principles for every dollar of GDP that's quote-unquote created. The sources for that are the St. Louis Fed and Economagic's website, and they also get their information directly from government sources. Total U.S. corporate debt is almost $9 trillion. Again, that's the St. Louis Fed. They claim that includes financial leverage. I am very skeptical of that. I believe that when you include financial leverage, it's much, much higher. The good generally accepted accounting principles debt to GDP ratio is 587%, not the 105 to 107% that you hear tossed about in the media. And again, that is using the same accounting standards that your business has to use. If you don't do it, you get audited by the IRS, you might end up in jail, you'll pay fines. The U.S. government does it, it's not a big deal. They can do whatever they want, apparently. Those are some real numbers. Also interesting, we talked about the credit rating of the U.S. government. They were restored to AAA. In 2014, by Fitch, who is one of the three major rating agencies. They removed the U.S. from a downgrade watch, and I'm reading right from a website here, after politicians put off another debt limit battle until the following year. So Fitch, these paid shills, fraudsters, criminals, are still rating the government that's in the worst fiscal hole in the history of the human race as AAA, most highly secure debt in the world. You'll never lose a dime going with the U.S. government. I wouldn't give these guys a freaking buffalo nickel at 100% interest.
You know, Andy,
Now,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue, please.
One little bit of addendum here. This year, in January of this year, Fitch Ratings warned that an extended 2018-19 government shutdown might lead to a downgrade in the credit rating if lawmakers are unable to pass a budget or manage the debt ceiling. There is no friggin' debt ceiling. It's gone! They agreed that there was not going to be a debt ceiling anymore. It's over. That's gone. Hey, it's Katie, bar the doors. That whole thing is this. Oh, go ahead. I'm going to blow a gasket here.
Well, the question that I have is that whenever I listen to, the Fed chairman give their analysis of, for example, today of keeping the rates the way it is, not increasing the rate. I don't understand the thing they're talking about. I don't understand anything. I mean, it's like as if I've never heard this before, and I have no education here. I've never read an article about the Federal Reserve, about interest rates, and they just talk and they make it seem everything's so vanilla and everything is fine. Everything is not fine. Everyone knows it's not fine. In fact, is not our bond rating now like triple B or double B or something like that, minus or something like that?
That's what I was just telling you. They restored, the ratings agencies restored the U.S. government to AAA. So according to them, U.S. government bonds are basically what we in economics and finance call the riskless asset. Every pricing model that you look at for different various assets has an assumption into it. It's called the riskless asset. Usually it's cash. For a while it was 30-day treasury bills, that sort of thing. Something that's not going to blow up or is deemed to be impossible to blow up. Well, U.S. debt is still considered the riskless asset, and that is going to cause a major problem because all these pricing models, they're all inaccurate because there is risk. There's default risk. Well, we can't default. Well, why not? When you get to the point where you can't make your interest payments, I mean, how a family doesn't get away with it. A state doesn't get away with it. Now, these guys think, and people like, what's his face? These bozo economists on Bloomberg. I'm losing my mind too. They've actually, I don't know if they actually believe this or if they're just really good liars, but they believe that, there's no way that the U.S. can ever default. But you go back and you look at reserve currencies of the world historically, they last about this long. We're right in there. 94 years we're at, going on 95. And that is right fat in the middle of the range where they usually fall to pieces. And this is going back to England and France, other countries, going back several hundred years. So they think, because we have computers, we have these fancy math formulas, we can make this go on forever. We have all these tricks up our sleeve. We can print money and buy worthless assets. And here's the thing. So when they did that, when they had TARP and TSLF and all these other credit facilities back in 2009, when they were buying up all these worthless mortgage assets, so the Fed's balance sheet swelled over $4 trillion. That's what they admit. It's probably quite a bit higher than that, but that's what they admit. So we'll go with 4 trillion. Well, now they're starting to sell that off. So they call that quantitative tightening. That's not an economic term. That is a management of expectations term that has been developed or invented, whatever, along with quantitative easing, which basically meant inflation. Quantitative tightening. So when they sell those assets back in, and I don't know who's buying them. Are you buying them? I'm not buying them.
Absolutely not.
Did you line up? Did you line up and buy a tranche of AAA mortgage bonds? Joe, are you the one that's doing this? Come on, I told you to knock that stuff off. But here's the thing. When they sell these back out, what does it do to money? Banks, whoever is buying this stuff, pays dollar notes for those assets. It's pulling money out of the system. So they start doing this, all of a sudden the stock market tanks. Gee, I wonder what happened there. When you pull money out of the system, that is what causes prices to drop. And they're certainly not going to have the prices of milk and cookies and Big Macs and all that stuff drop. So, that's kind of curious. That it's an interesting coincidence, let's just say, that they start shelling off a bunch of their worthless assets, and all of a sudden the stock market, goes into a near panic. Which, by the way, the banks love that. The traders, they absolutely love that stuff. They don't care. They make money either way. As long as there's volatility, they're thrilled. You'll see, the next quarter or so, their profits are going to be up big time from all that volatility. You know who lost? Pension plans, retirement accounts, everyday people. It's who always loses. So, big whoop. The market, the Dow lost 5,000 points because these guys sold a bunch of their balance sheet. It's Joe. It's so obvious what is going on here, and I just don't understand. People, it's not even that they won't see it. People aren't even willing to consider it. That's the thing. It's like normalcy bias on steroids.
Yeah. Well, what I don't understand, Andy, is that how do they rate our bonds were actually junk status for a while, and then all of a sudden they become AAA1. I mean, how did that happen? I mean, do they just make these pronouncements and dictate exactly what it is? I mean, but the foreign countries, they have financial people that are a hell of a lot smarter than the people we have here. And
I don't know about
but
that.
yet they're buying our bonds, and why would they buy our bonds when they know that we can't possibly pay them back?
Well, it's like I said, I think the last time or the time before, people are trying to exit slowly. Nobody wants to just run out of this thing because everybody, there's greed involved here on the part of everyone, really. China, Japan, all of our creditors. They all wanted into this thing. China got their industrial revolution. Japan got all kinds of emoluments for doing this. The Arabs, they got monopoly exclusive pricing in the American oil market for a long time. Because of all of this. So everybody's greedy, and now they're looking at this and they're like, what, this whole thing is this isn't so good to be 100% into this thing. So let's try and back out. But we don't want to just run for the exit. We're going to try and back out real slow so that we don't lose what we gained. See, that's the thing. Everybody's greedy. So everybody wants to get out the door without anybody giving up anything. That's kind of where we're at right now. And that's why you're seeing, a $100 billion deal, a $200 billion deal, instead of we're going to exclusively do this with these 3 countries, and we're not going to use dollars at all, and it's going to be worth $500 billion, $750 billion, whatever. You're not seeing those deals of that size because it would cause things to, it would cause a lot of disruption. So We'll do it a little piece here, a little piece there. The dollar's going to die of 1,000 cuts. This whole system, this entitlement system that we have in this country, that's all been backed up. It's all been backstopped by this ridiculous notion that we can just do whatever we want, borrow as much money as we want, spend as much money as we want, and never, ever have to pay the piper. It's just ridiculous. It is absolutely insane. But when you try and talk to people, well, yeah, that 2008 thing, that was pretty bad. But these are the people, Joe. They called up on September 15th when Lehman went down. These were the people that were crying on the phone. I remember. And I know a lot of other guys do too. And now all of a sudden, well, it's 10 years down the road, and well, we're really kicking butt, and we're gonna nuke the Middle East, and we're gonna turn it into a parking lot. And really? There's a lot of people over there who never did anything to anybody. It is just the hubris. And everybody talks about making America great. You can't be great if you're not willing to be good. We're not even good. What kind of a good country does a coup d'etat in plain sight to another country? If we're so worried about the people of Venezuela, why aren't we over in places like Liberia or Burkina Faso or some of these other places where we have these dirtbag potentates? Let's liquidate a few of those guys and help some people out. No, you know what? You know why we don't do that? Because they don't have oil. They don't have anything we want. The only reason we care about the people of Venezuela is because there's oil there. If people are too dumb to realize that, or too blind, or too entrenched in their political ideology, I feel sorry for them. I really do. I mean, this is just a total. I can't even say it. This is a family show.
Well, is it possible that that we maintain our status, or that the other countries accept our status as the world's reserve currency, because we house our military, in their countries, and that provides them with basically free defense and spending of U.S. dollars? And should we close those military bases and return the soldiers home and neutralize the situation, that these countries may not accept the U.S. dollar or accept it as a AAA one, source of revenue?
Well, yeah, and not to mention the fact that while we continue to run up massive external debts, we're still giving money away. We're handing money away everywhere. All of these bases that we're trying to use to surround Russia. Those bases are in countries. All those countries get aid from us. Aid? We can't even take care of our own. What are we doing? Aid? I mean, yeah, it's good to help people. We start at home. We can't even take care of our roads. We can't take care of our cities, our infrastructure. We can't. We're around the world. It's. I remember like it was yesterday. It was 1991. I took a poli-sci class. Yeah, I know. But it was actually an interesting class, and the professor was, I don't know if he's still alive or not. If he wasn't, I'd use his name. But he was very leftward leaning, obviously, even at that time. But he pointed out that the United States was becoming what he called the world's policeman, and that was the order of things that he felt was going to continue into the 21st century, and he ended up being absolutely correct.
Right.
And this was a long. I mean, this was right around the time H.W. Bush mentioned his New World Order, made that famous, infamous speech where he mentioned the New World Order. It wasn't long after that we started to police the rest of the world. So first it was militarily. Now it's economically, but who's in the best position to police economically? Well, everybody should be kind of on their own to do that. And you're watching right now across the ocean with Britain and this whole exiting the EU, just, watching the people's will be overturned by a few filthy politicians. It's absolutely amazing to me how this is. I mean, it's going on 3 years almost since the Brexit. It was June 23rd, 2016. And so it's almost 3 years, and they're still messing around, trying to make deal. What do you make a deal for? What? You voted to leave, so leave. How hard is this? Oh, well, we got to make sure that there's an arrangement for this and an arrangement in this article and that article. It got all politicked up, and they sent the hatchet guys in there, and the whole thing is it's shot to pieces. The people over there that pushed for this, they're convinced that their government will never let it happen.
Yeah. Well, the Fed chairman today. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I said the Fed chairman today, talked about the refusal to increase interest rates, which he was committed to do, but now he backtracked. And I listened to it for a while, and I'll be honest with you. I never understand them. I never understand a thing that they say. They say a lot of words. Right. They read word for word from a script. And I just feel I'll be honest with you. I just feel awfully stupid. I'm familiar with what they're talking about, but I feel awfully stupid as I have no idea what their reasoning is. And other than it sounds like weasel words followed by another weasel word. So you really don't say anything at all, and you can't ask a question because you really didn't make a statement. And you didn't give an explanation as to true explanation as to why you did it, and took the position you did. And then they never addressed the debt and the fact that we can't pay our debts and that we're bankrupt. They never talk the truth. They just use these nice words that flavor over absolutely everything. Am I that dense that I don't understand what they're saying?
I don't even bother listening to those, honestly. I wait till the transcript out and try and read it. These guys will talk, and I think that's one of the qualifications for the job, honestly. You have to be able to talk for a half hour and say absolutely nothing. That's honestly, I think that's one of the things they look for when they bring these guys in. Bernanke was an absolute master. Yeah. The only thing we ever got out of him that was substantive was the jobless recovery. Remember that? When he said we're going to have a jobless recovery in 2010, I believe it was. Yeah. That was the only substance that we ever got from a good professor from New Jersey. It's amazing. These guys will never talk. See, and the thing is, they're not going to talk about the debt because guess who owns most of it? They do. they own a lot of it. And most of the people in this country think that if they monetize the Treasury's debt, that, in other words, the Treasury issues the bonds and then the Fed creates the money and buys the bonds, that's monetizing. Most people think if we do that we just owe the money to ourselves. Yeah. They're hoodwinked into thinking that, because that's when you talk to people, that's really what they believe. Did you know, I've been doing kind of an informal survey, and 83% of the people that I've talked to since the beginning of the year believe the dollar is still backed by gold.
What percent? What percent?
83.
Holy smoke! Holy smoke!
Yep. 83%. So and the same cohort of people, almost 90% of them believe that when they see the red and green arrows on the evening news for the stock market, that's the economy. They believe that that's the economy. So you're talking the vast majority of people that just they're not in the right zip code, they're not in the right state, they're not even in the right country. They're out in some island in the South Pacific. Yeah. And you know what? It isn't their fault, really. You have to know that you're being basically given a bill of goods to actually go and do something. And the salesmanship of this has become so proficient that most people, they don't even realize it. They're in that, remember Rumsfeld had that dumb thing with the 4 quadrants? We know what we know. We know we don't know something. I forget what they were, but the last one was we don't know what we don't know.
know,
Well,
right? Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay, all right. So, but honestly, that's where a lot of people are. They don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
So they don't know that they need to, look into this stuff. And I'm going to tell you something straight up. We put up a post last night, and we're having some issues. And I wanted to use the quote that Thomas Jefferson made about turning the issue of money and credit over to a central bank, and how first by inflation, then by deflation, they would basically deprive the nation of its wealth, and we'd wake up homeless on the continent our fathers conquered. Well, I wanted to get something more close than a paraphrase, and check this out. The great website Snopes, remember, the urban legend website? They say if this urban legend is true or not. Snopes says that Jefferson never said that. It's false. It's fake news.
Yeah.
Joe, I'm telling you, go to your bookstore, buy old books, because we're at the point in this country where we're burning the books.
That's right. Yeah.
You can go to the Monticello, which was Jefferson's home, the Monticello archives. You can find references to that quote. You can find references to that quote in old economic texts, letters, all kind of places, everywhere. Snopes, nope, false, fake. We got a real problem.
Yeah.
We got a real problem. The truth's getting flushed down every hole.
Look at the latest thing, the latest program that they're talking about, a universal income, basic income for everyone. And they talk about it as if there's all this money that's bulging out of this vault and they have to get rid of it somehow, but they never talk about where it's coming from and the fact that we're broke. They never use the word debt. Never use the word debt. No. They never use the word deficit. They never use the word, where the money's coming from. They're just talking about, well, should we allocate it this way? We have three major, ways of doing this. Which is the best? And no one's saying, hey, by the way, none of them are the best. They're all disasters. And yet, that's all they talk about. And we have become a nation of zombies in that we accept what we hear and only what we hear, and we don't take anything outside of that sphere of information that we get from television, just like George Orwell 1984. It's an exact carbon copy of that. And they say, well, we're going to have a basic income. That's a good idea. So it's either A, B, or C. Let's see which one is the best. And no one says, hey, how about D? How about none of them? None of the above. We never have none of the above anymore.
No, and that's not just being pushed in this country. I think I sent it to you. The IMF, in their publications, is really pushing for this. The World Bank, Bank for International Settlements, the UN, every single global, I hate to say think tank, I'll call them stink tanks. How's that? Every global stink tank is pushing this stuff. And all it is, and there's all kinds of fancy terminology. I'll distill it down for you real quickly. All it is robbing from this guy who works to give to this guy who doesn't.
Yeah.
Everybody has to be equal, and this is a joke. If you remember back to the 1990s, mid 1990s, when this whole globalization kick started, it was sold to the United States as, well, we're going to bring the rest of the world up to the living standard of everyone here in the U.S. That's not how that works. All they aim to do, and that's what they aim to do. I mean, it's in the white papers. They were aiming to bring the U.S. down to the rest of the world. They want this socialist utopia, and it doesn't exist. It's, there was some French guy, Boyer, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, said, when we have a socialist utopia, the oceans will turn to lemonade and roasted chickens will fly into our mouths. I kid you not. Now, They must have had some really good mind altering stuff going on back there, when this stuff comes out. But honestly, that's what these institutions want. They want this socialist utopia, but not for them. They want it for you and me and all of us little folks. But what they want capitalism, because they want to be able. They understand innovation, motive for profit. They understand all of that. These elite, these institutions, that they understand capitalism. They understand free markets. That's what they want for themselves, not for you. You get to play in this cesspool, where the government says, well, you can't trade with this country, and we don't really care if it hurts your business or not, because there's something they have that the people who pull our strings want.
Yeah.
That's what we get to deal with.
Well, what I don't understand is that people are afraid of the type of government that's in Russia, for example, because Russia is a terrible place to live. But now you find that people want to adopt the type of economic system that dictates in Russia. And now it's a good thing. But if you say, well, that's what Russia has, they deny that. They say, oh, no, we're going to do it differently. It's going to be a democratic way of doing it. It's not going to be a forced way of doing it. Well, it has to be forced because you have to take money from people who have earned it. And no one wants to accept that fact. They want to say, well, I know Russia does it that way, but it's really not like Russia. It's like free market, redistribution, and because we're a free country and Russia is not. Well, once you start redistributing the income, you no longer have a free country. Are you with me there? Uh-oh, did I lose you? Let's see. Andy, are you there? You're frozen on the screen. I don't know what happened to you. Andy, I think I lost you. Do you know what we can do? Andy, hold on. Let's see if it somehow rejuvenates itself and comes back. I guess they didn't like what I had to say, did they?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. You were missing for about 60 seconds. They didn't like what I had to say, or you had to say.
I'm not surprised. It's been that kind of week.
Yeah. Well, I get so discouraged because I even speak to older people who are business people, and they talk like socialists, they talk like communists. And they're repeating what they listen on television. I mean, George Orwell had this thing pinned down perfectly, and I just can't believe that people buy into it. They actually think that they don't think the government's broke. They think the dollar's as good as gold. And I actually used to go to a meeting every Tuesday morning with some businessmen and whatever, and I stopped going because I could not even ask a question without me being told that I had a negative attitude. I couldn't even ask the question because I had a negative attitude. And I'm just curious as to what your opinion is on this. I said, and I used to talk about demographics and how, less income and, et cetera, and more expenses and whatever. And they look at me like glassy-eyed, like, what planet are you coming from? We're the richest country in the world. And I go, these people are business people. How could they be? I mean, they're educated. They all have college educations and then some, and they don't see it. They don't see it at all.
No, it's a lie. It's been repeated long enough, and that's what they tried in Germany. When they tried to have the Ministry of Truth, as Eric Blair, aka George Orwell, put it. Make it take a lie, make it a big one, and repeat it, and eventually it becomes the truth, whether it's true or not. Yeah, and that's what you hear, and it's the same stuff. People will have discussions about this stuff, and all they do is parrot the same stuff that they hear on television. It's like very few have independent thoughts or anything like that. But I will say there is some good news. I have recently been hearing more and more from parents and seniors and people, of that age, late teens and so forth. People are very seriously reconsidering the whole idea of accumulating college debt. They're really starting to ask questions like, does it really make sense for me to do this? This is what I want to major in. I get a lot of those kind of questions, and that's good. And it seems like awareness on that whole issue with student loan debt is starting to kick up, and that's extremely good news, because those are the people. That's where we need to instill some decent habits, some economic awareness, that sort of thing, is the younger folks, because honestly the folks, I don't know, 35, 40 and up, they've heard this repeated so often that it's just kind of, okay, yeah, it must be the way it is. And so very rarely does anything happen to shake that confidence. And when it does, guess who gets blamed for it? They do. The whole 2008 thing, those greedy Americans, they took out mortgages that they couldn't afford. You know what? If you're a bank, Cristiano National Bank, are you going to make a $750,000 loan to somebody making minimum wage?
Of course I would.
Are you going to do that?
Absolutely. It makes sense to me. I see your point. So, you're right, absolutely right. The banks are the ones that promoted all of this, and then let them sink. Let them all sink with it.
Yeah, they were the ones that said, well, for the first 48 months, all you need to do is pay $300 a month, and that's where they stopped.
Right.
What about the other? What about the reverse amortizing mortgage? I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it was craziness. And people signed the bottom line. They signed at the dotted line. Well, I didn't really understand it. What the heck did you sign it for? You don't do that. So the blame rests on both sides, really. And all the while, you had all these wizards. That Schmuck Bernanke, Greenspan, all those guys. Paulson, remember him?
Yeah.
Robert Rubin. Rubin. Remember Robert Rubin?
Yes.
Larry Summers. Remember those guys?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I know. It's like a bad headache. All those guys sat there and said, oh, yeah, this is a good idea. This is good. It's all good. There's no problem here. There's no problem here. When the whole thing blows up, then it's America's fault.
Yeah. How do you see?
Then it's the average guy's fault.
Do you see a within the next year or two some sort of economic? I hate to use the word collapse because it's becoming so common to say that, or some sort of a economic revision. Okay, let me put it nicely. Economic revision, a dollar standard change. I mean, obviously we can't continue to pile on trillions of dollars worth of debt. When I had Professor Kutlikoff on the program 2 years ago, he said our real debt is $223 trillion. That was 2 years ago. Now it's over $1 quadrillion. And how does it sustain itself? And when it does, when someone says no thank you to the dollar and there's this chain reaction and everything goes, what happens then? I mean, do you see that in the near future, or you don't think that'll ever happen?
It's already happening. I mean, it's been happening. That's what these little deals are for. They're cutting out the dollar, but they're not. It's not going to crash. I find it. Honestly, and Graham and I, we've gone back and forth with this. I mean, he's still in the industry. I'm a sideline observer now, which I actually think is better, just because you lose the inside bias, so to speak. But he's pretty much a wizard, and we've gamed this back and forth and whatnot. And honestly, neither one of us thinks it's going to crash. It is crashing, but it's doing it slowly. They have those commercials or those things on TV when they do car safety, and they'll take a car and mark it up, with X's and O's and plus signs and whatever, and put dummies in it, and then they'll run it slow motion into that brick wall. Yeah. And you can just see the fenders start crumpling and the hood crumples and the dummy's heads start going forward. Well, that's what's happening. It's all happening very slowly. It's been happening really for the last decade, but it hasn't reached a point yet where you're seeing the cracks at the surface. So in other words, the car's kind of made contact. There's been some crumpling, but nobody's head's hit the windshield yet. And I think, honestly, they can push this off quite a bit longer than any one of us is willing to really fathom. Yeah. When you think about it, when you go back 25, 30 years, this thing should have come to a halt a long time ago. 87, possibly. The whole situation in 2000 with the recession, 2003 again, 2007. And we never left that recession. We're still in it. By any objective measure, I do not acknowledge GDP as a measurement of economic growth. You know what? If the government here wants to say we don't acknowledge the president of Venezuela as the president, you know what? I don't acknowledge your stupid statistic. How's that? because it's cooked. It's not real. It's fake. It's fake. So we don't recognize it. We've come up with some alternative measurements that have been used in the past in various capacities and have shown worth. So we use those, and according to those measurements, we're still stuck in that recession. The only reason we're not in worse shape is because of credit and debt. Honestly, if you pull out the $1 trillion U.S. government deficit, 6% of GDP is gone.
Right.
What would they say if the Commerce Department came out and said that fourth quarter GDP contracted at an annual rate of 6%? What would the headlines be? Depression.
That's right? Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's what would happen if you pull out the $1 trillion that the government borrows in this next fiscal year, or the $978 billion or whatever the Congressional Budget Office is saying this week. Now, that's just them. What about the states? What about the locality? What about individuals? What about the $15 trillion mortgage market? What about the $9 trillion in commercial? I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Right.
You start taking even small pieces of this out of the economy, and you have a huge hole. So, yeah, we never left that recession. People need to get that. People need to start behaving as if we're in a recession. But here's the kicker. Even you're starting to see now some of the leaning economists, commentators, and so forth are talking about a recession in the U.S. later this year. So a recognized one, not the one we're actually having, one that they're willing to recognize.
What do you think the trigger will be, though?
It's already happened. Triggers debt loads, global aggregate demand is down. So we're all entwined. We're all kind of joined together now globally. That's what globalization did. And unfortunately, where one goes, we kind of all go the same way. And it's not the debt is not just a U.S. problem. And I know I've said this, and people are probably like, "Oh, here he goes again." It's a global issue. So the ones that don't have a central bank that thinks it can issue what it believes will be the reserve currency through the barrel of a gun forever. So basically the rest of the world, this debt is impacting them. Greece, all those European countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy, all those countries that are going, all you're hearing is austerity. France, with their, they've had riots over fuel subsidies, in the past couple of months. All these countries that can't do what we're still able to do for now, they're already feeling it. Yeah. So aggregate demand globally, when I say aggregate, I mean total. So total demand for goods and services globally is contracting. And
Yes.
so the globe's heading into a recession. So we're going to go right along with it. They can borrow as much money as they want, and they might put it off, but all they're going to do is make that with the wall even worse. But it's not going to be a crash. I don't believe.
Okay.
I believe it'll be slow, and that way people won't notice.
That's right. Well, Andy, we're about reached the witching hour at this point, and we'd like to give you just your last 60 seconds and just to wrap things up, or tell us when you'll be back, if you'll be back, and what you want to discuss.
Well, certainly, I'd definitely like to come back again, next week if you'd have me. And
Fine.
I am convinced of one thing: every week there will be something new that's coming at us that will need to be discussed, whether it's a coup d'etat, the Fed's balance sheet, another war, more economic sanctions, another outside the dollar deal. Take your pick. I mean, it's kind of like a grab basket. There will be something to talk about that's different from this week, next week, but it'll be more of the same. This all is like a variation on a theme.
Right.
This is done, that is done. It's not the right decision, not for the people. But you have to remember, it is the right decision for somebody, but just not you and me. And everybody else that's listening. That's what people need to understand from this. We do have people following the show from that hit the page from about 100 countries. I know they all didn't watch, but they at least all saw the last episode posted. So hopefully we can get some of those folks watching.
Yes.
And get some people in here. And what I'd like to do also is start bringing some questions to the episodes, because we're always getting questions. If it's possible, I'd like to bring like maybe one or two a week that are concurrent with what's going on, and deal with those.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll be looking for those questions then. Then we'll bring them on to the next show, and maybe let's tentatively schedule for next Wednesday again. Okay.
All right. That sounds like a
All
plan.
right. Andy, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's a great show. Appreciate you being on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and I'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there's no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.